Are you an administrator or a bureaucrat? Are you working for the government in some capacity? And maybe you're discouraged because of that. Maybe you think, well, I should be working in business. I should be having my own business. Well, or you think to yourself, I am an administrator and really my position is not ideal. It's not the thing I would have chosen for my life. Or even if you think not just of your work, but of your own circumstances, you think my circumstances really aren't what I would have chosen them to be ideally. Well, this is for you. I've got an encouragement for you. I've got a word for you, not from secular psychology, not from some book I read, but this is from the Bible, the Word of God. This is the third in a series of studies dealing with God's administrators, people who worked for the civil governments and were what you might call bureaucrats as well. And the third is maybe the biggest. It's difficult. Which one was the biggest? Joseph on the one hand, Daniel on the other. They're both huge, towering figures in the world of redemption, in the world of God's purposes. And that is significant in itself, is it not? It's significant that God has chosen to reveal, because Daniel was a prophet, to reveal his purposes for the whole of human history, let's just say, through a bureaucrat. I was going to say humble bureaucrat. He was humble, but he was a very exalted bureaucrat at the same time. He was an exalted administrator. So let's consider Daniel. Now, how do you interpret the Bible? There's a number of key rules, but a really helpful rule is this, that we think of, number one, what does the text say? What do the words mean? What does the sentence mean? What does the paragraph mean? Etc., etc. And then in which context historically does it find itself? Because there's no book of the Bible that just floats in the air. There's nothing happens around it. It's just generalized truths about God. There's no book in the Bible. Every book in the Bible touches on real people with wives, children, families. They lived someplace. These definitive things happen to them. No different with Daniel. And I believe that if you listen to the end, you're going to hear something that will encourage your socks off, that will make a difference in how you view your work as a government administrator forever, and it will give you that peace and give that ability for you to consecrate your job. You might say, well, other people, they can consecrate their work to God. If they are religious, if they're a missionary, that's easy. If they're a pastor, that's easy. If they care for people, that's easy. But my job, no way. Well, this is going to be a key, I believe. It's going to help you see God in your own work. All right. Now, let's begin with the scriptures. It's Daniel chapter 1, verse 1. In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, to Jerusalem and besieged it. This is the opening verse. This is the overwhelming context of Daniel's life. What was happening? Absolute catastrophe. The worst possible thing. His world was crumbling around him. There was no hope for the nation. Everything had gone to hell in a handcart. It was just a matter of sweeping up the remnants. All the work had been done, just have to sweep up Jerusalem. This was the center of world religion for the Christian faith, the faith in the Messiah in the world. And it was going to fall hard, and fall to the worst possible nation, Babylon. Babylon, the home of sorcery, whoredom, magic, evil. The center from even Genesis chapter 11 of rebellion against God's purposes on the earth. The Tower of Babel, which Babel means Babylon, of course. The Tower of Babylon. It was founded by a most evil man, that is the mighty hunter. Who's the mighty hunter? Help me out here. Nimrod, the mighty hunter. I've spoken it, but I just couldn't get it to mind. It was founded by a most evil man who defied God to his face. This is the kind of person that founded this evil, wicked city. So you might be saying to yourself, well, I'm looking around, I'm a concerned Christian looking around at my context, at my nation, be it the United States, England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, you name it, especially in the English-speaking world, and thinking Christianity is just going over a cliff here. I'm seeing judgment all around me. I'm seeing people who don't look like me, don't have the same background as me. They're going higher and higher. And me, I'm going lower and lower. This is judgment. How am I supposed to live my life, have a career, function, never mind prosper, in that context where everything is so bad? And I want to tell you that no matter how bad things are, and they are bad, they're definitively not as bad as Daniel's situation. He was seeing that the whole earth wiped off, the influence of Christ and so on, just wiped off. This visible, tangible place where you could go, where the temple was, all wiped away. And even it says in verse 2, with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried in the land of Shinar to the house of his God. When a nation invaded, it wasn't just taking territory. It was one God conquering the other God. Now, we know that that is not how things work, but the impression that was left was that this great Jehovah, well, he was strong in his day, but now the big dogs in town, the Babylonian gods, he's ruling, and he has just knocked Jehovah off his perch. And I think that's a thought that we can have in the back of our minds, that yes, in the 19th century, Jesus was God and he had this influence. 18th century, yes. Reformation, yes. Early church, yes. But now, well, where do we see Christianity prospering? Where do we see the kingdom of God advancing? But no, the way things unfold tells a different story. But the point is, his situation was dire. If you look at Deuteronomy 28, it's the most crucial chapter in the Bible for understanding judgment. What does judgment look like? And you have to go, as you go down the chapter from verse 15 onwards, things get worse and worse and worse and worse. I think there's 72 verses in the chapter, maybe 62, but you have to go down to verse 49 when God brings a nation from afar off, a foreign tongue, fierce. They don't respect women, children, the elderly. No, they are absolutely vicious. And then you have to go to verse 52 before you get to a siege. And they are experiencing the siege right then, right there. So things have gone way past where we are in our situation. And yet we know, broadly speaking, the story of Daniel. The story of Daniel was a story of, in the face of all opposition, Daniel, he was like that polystyrene ball held down at the bottom of the swimming pool. The harder it doesn't matter how hard or long you held it down, as soon as your fingers got tired, poof, it just shot up right to the top, poof, up to the surface. All right. How bad was it? Jerusalem, the visible city of God, wiped away. The temple devastated, partially sacked. God looked as if he was weak compared to the gods. Maybe we think, compared to the gods of secularism, the gods of atheism, whatever, well, even Islam, we're terrified about Islam. We're quaking in our boots, as if somehow God has lost his power. We've got to fight against that thought. Judgment in a land, and even judgment on an individual, is not a sign that God's not absent. It's the sign that God's present and that God's ruling. We've got to get things straight. But back to Daniel. Now, here we come to something very delicate and difficult. Verse 3. And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs. Okay. Eunuchs, what does eunuch mean? It means a man who has been unmanned, a man whose organs of generation have been cut off. He's no longer fully a man. And what do we find here? The master of the eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel and of the king's seed and of the princes. This tells us something more. And this is in response to a prophecy that I can't quite get at the moment. I think the 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles gives this prophecy. And it's given to Hezekiah when Hezekiah shows the treasures of the temple to, yes, no, okay, treasures of the temple to the king of Babylon. And he's prophesied, he said, Hezekiah, your sons, that I will bring the king of Babylon to you, and your sons will be taken away, and they'll be made eunuchs. So that's a Bible prophecy. And where do we see that Bible prophecy fulfilled? If not right here. Right here. Daniel was exalted, exalted, exalted. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were exalted, exalted to the high, high, high places. But they were not fully men. They could never have a wife, biblically speaking. They can't consummate a marriage without the marriage equipment, the male marriage equipment. You can't have children without the male marriage equipment. These are men whose lives, well, what do they have? Their lives are always going to be, they're always going to be limited severely. And maybe you're thinking to yourself, well, I'm 40, I'm 50, I'm 60 something. I've never been married. I have no prospect of getting married. I have no prospect of having a child. And you might think to yourself, therefore, that God has no purpose for you and that you've failed in life. But here we find a very clear indication, and the reference is, I can't quite find it yet. I'll keep looking for it. Yes, okay, Isaiah 39:7. And of the sons that shall issue from thee, this is God to Hezekiah, which thou shalt beget, shall they take away, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. There's Joseph, very powerful man, in an analogous situation, brought to be the second in command, third in command, second in command to Pharaoh. He is not a eunuch, he has a wife, and he has children, Manasseh and Ephraim. Daniel, despite him being at the apex of power as an administrator, no wife is mentioned, no lineage is mentioned. So if you think not just that your situation is dire, your nation's situation, the situation of Christianity in your country, around the world, is dire, it's not as dire as that time, and your personal situation is by no means as bad as his. He had no marriage equipment, no hope of a wife, no hope of sexual fulfillment ever, no hope of children, of a progeny, no hope. Daniel has a tremendous message for us, therefore. Okay, and the king spoke unto Ashpenaz, the master of the eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel and of the king's seed and of the princes. What else does this tell us? Under ideal circumstances, Daniel, who was such a stellar administrator, who was from the line of Hezekiah himself, he could have been king of Judah. He could have sat on Judah's throne. Now, the Bible doesn't tell us explicitly. We have to piece it together. But there's every indication, given this exceptional talent, given his lineage as part of the royal house, part of the princes, that he is going to rise to the top, even to the very top, to the kingship. But that was all snatched away from him There was no hope of getting married, no hope of sexual fulfillment, no hope ever of a family. And there was no hope ever that he would fulfill that promise that he already had, very likely, of becoming king, or at least ruling in the court that was King David's court. All his hopes, all the key earthly hopes were gone forever. Do you see the depth of the despair that could have taken over Daniel? At the personal level, at the national level, at the level of a concern for God's work in the earth. He could have been consumed by grief, consumed by self-pity all his days, consumed by bitterness at what could have been. If I had have done this earlier in my life, I would have blah, 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 blah. And maybe you're like me. Maybe you carry regret in your life. Or you could list by the dozen things that you did wrong when you were younger, or things that you didn't do, opportunities that you didn't take. Well, again, with Daniel, his list is longer, and if it's not longer than yours, it weighs more. He had to bear a heavy, heavy, heavy burden. Okay, children in whom there was no blemish, verse 4, but well favored and skillful in all wisdom and cunning, in knowledge and understanding, science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. So these were the political administrators. These were the top guys that were taught all their lives, trained all their lives to serve in the king, as king perhaps, and certainly in the king's court. Now, add to that the fact that it says earlier that Daniel was only part of what you might call the brain drain or the skill drain. He was certainly part of the brain drain. It talks about understanding, science. But look at this, 2 Kings 24:16. And all the men of might, all the men of ability, all the men who could do stuff, all the able men, even 7,000. The number 7, it's the number of completeness. And 1,000, well, they hoovered up everybody essentially. And craftsmen, people that can build things, fix things, make beautiful things, functional things, smiths for making doors, swords, the stuff of life, you name it, for industry, 1,000. All that were strong and apt for war. So the defense of the country. Even them the king of Babylon brought captive to Babylon. Does this ring a bell? That the state, central government, it can pay above market wages. It's just hoovering up all the skillful people, the able people, the promising people, the graduates. On the one hand, it closes down industry. It fights against industry. On the other hand, what is it doing? It's sucking up the graduates. It's saying, well, we're going to give you 10%, 20% more. We're going to give you security. And well, who could say no to that? You know, I looked a good, solid Christian friend. Let's call him Big Boy. A lovely fella. We'd give you the shirt off his back. He was working in the private sector. Can't remember what he was. Yeah, he was working for a funeral director at one stage. But he was then in the civil service, doubtless still is. And he looked at me with this fear in his eyes. And he realized, Nathan, I've got a wife, children, I've got a mortgage. I can't say anything. If I say anything, I'm out. Because as we know in big business, and even more so in the civil service, there's very strict codes about what you can say. And if you start talking about Jesus this and Jesus that, okay. Well, but what is he to do? What's he to do? People are being forced into these positions. And perhaps you say, well, I had no other option. I wanted to do this. I wanted to do that. But sadly, the state which wars against productivity, productive people, as we find in 1 Samuel chapter 8, with the prophecy of what would happen, prophecy by to the Lord by Samuel, to Samuel, should we say, about what happens when the people of God turn and get a king like the king of Babylon. Well, part of that is just they take the best. They take the best stuff, they take the best people, and they centralize the power, they tax you, all these things that we're seeing today. And look, this is the real world we live in. And I've chosen not to go the route of working. The natural route for me would have been to work for the state as a teacher. That's where the funnel was leading me. I'm glad I didn't do it, but I don't have the house that I would have had otherwise. I don't have the steady income, the pension to look forward to. I chose another life, but I realized that it comes as a compromise. And I realized that not everybody is, set up to do that, let's just say. But let's just say that circumstances have forced you into doing what you wouldn't rather have done, wouldn't have picked to do, chosen to do. And how much more so when you're picked up at spear point, knife point, sword point, everything destroyed all around you, nothing standing, and they take the best. They take the best administrators, the best brains, the best arms for building, the best arms for war. Where is the British Army today? It really doesn't exist. It's been, because of political decisions, it's just crumbled away to nothing. And we see this and we can lament it all we like, but what could we do? Wishing won't make it better. So perhaps you're in that situation where you see the difficulty, you see the fact, well, what's happened to industry in this country? There should be more people in industry. There should be more people in actual defense. What we see today in the police, we see these little women who are supposed to be able to arrest grown men. Pathetic. We don't see the army as we should do. These men are elsewhere. Okay. So what else? How can we sum this all up? Well, personally, Daniel had everything to complain about. He could have spent his life focused on what could have been, what might have been. His dynasty could have been the dynasty of Christ. We don't know. It's not mentioned what line he's from. I don't know which line Hezekiah was from, but he could have had his children on the throne, potentially, but he could see no children. His whole life, his whole nation was destroyed in front of him. I know someone who was born and raised in Rhodesia. Rhodesia became Zimbabwe, and he lost that country. Well, yeah, he had to flee Zimbabwe. And then he went to South Africa. That became his country for a while. He worked for the police there and so on. And he had to flee that country. He came to the UK, homeschooled there, faithfully, but once or twice he had the police at the door, and he had to leave that country too. And he's on his he's on his fourth country. So we haven't lost our country quite yet, but it's heading that way. Daniel had everything to look to the past to. What could have been, what might have been, even what should be. It shouldn't be like this, it shouldn't be like that. But we have to reckon at all times with God's providence. And my wife and I were just discussing this morning. That whether it be a given day in our life or our whole life, we can rest in the confidence that God is the God who ordains all things. And not just that. It doesn't stop there. There's more. Romans 8:28, the things that are ordained by God are ordained for our good. So we can take whatever miserable circumstance. And it wasn't joyful that he was castrated. It wasn't a joyful thing that he lost his nation. It wasn't a joyful thing that the temple of God was sacked. It wasn't a joyful thing that the people of God had apostatized, turned their backs on God so much for so long that the cause of God appeared to be dead in the world. None of that was joyful at all. But he could account it all joy. He could say, well, actually, because I know that everything is ordained by God, and that moment by moment, that my circumstances, the circumstances of my life, the temptation is to say, well, yes, that's fine for other people, but for my life, well, I'm different. No. All the circumstances of all our lives are ordained by God, and that is not just a doctrine floating in the sky in cloud land, in God land. God land is here. Okay, this is the place he rules. So, yes, we recognize how bad things are, but we also recognize that we are born for these bad times. Was it bad for Joseph when his brothers wanted to put him in a well, a dry well, and wanted to sell him, and he was then kidnapped to be sold? Was that a bad day? Well, yes, it was a bad day. But was it a bad day? Because if he hadn't been kidnapped, he could never have gone to Egypt and fulfilled his life's purpose, been exalted to the highest possible place a foreigner could ever be exalted to. He was the one who saved all of his brothers and saved the entire Jewish people and saved the line of Christ. So what we're going through now might feel bad, whether it be a moment or a day or a week or your entire life, but we got to, by faith, account it all as joy. Because God is God and he is on the throne. Now, the last thing I want to do is with blessing. Blessing. You know, why did Daniel rise? It's no secret that Daniel rose and he rose and he rose and he rose in the most improbable place against all the opposition in the world. He rose as high as anyone could rise, and then he rose higher and higher and higher still in successive administrations. How did he do that? Was it a technique? No. Was it some trick? No. It was the blessing of God. So one thing to learn about the blessing of God: the church might be in disarray, but God can still bless you to the highest possible level. Your personal circumstances might be dire, awful, totally unenviable, non-ideal, and still God can bless you. Now you talk about blessing, it sounds like a spiritual word. Like, I really feel blessed in my heart. When I go to the worship service, I feel so blessed in my heart, and I get all these warm feelings. And maybe that's part of it. You know, blessed can mean happy. But I'm talking about blessing as the Bible deals with it. The blessings we find in Deuteronomy 28, 1-14, they're visible blessings. Objective blessings, a blessing, a thing you can see. I think you can see that's enviable, that no one can deny. It's a blessing of food, of water, offspring. Where does that come from? The blessing of God. So we have to reject this general Christian idea that blessing is just in your heart or in heaven. No, biblically speaking, it's objective and it's seen in your life. And people seeing it in your life gives glory to God. Daniel's blessing was seen because he went up and up and up. He wasn't just preserved in a line like this. He went up and up and up. So blessing can be in the face of terrible circumstances. The church doesn't have to be a certain way. Your nation doesn't have to be a certain way to be blessed. And you don't have to be whole as a man. You might say, well, I don't have the Bible education I should do. I didn't study as hard as I should have done for all these years. I've done some things in my past that are just shameworthy. Well, if you repent, that's not an obstacle. There's this thing and that thing and the other thing. Well, Daniel was not a whole man. He was not a complete man, and the Lord blessed him. The idea that these prosperity preachers give and that some of the world gives is that blessing, or they might call it something else in the world, it has to be, if it's real blessing, it has to give you wealth and ease and a problem-free life. And we see here another thing about blessing, that blessing, it's real, objective, undeniable, but it can come with a lot of trouble. In this world you will have trouble. Daniel had trouble, but be of heart, good cheer, I have overcome the world. Well, Daniel overcame through faith in the heart of the world system, Babylon. And we can do the same. You know, blessing doesn't require the ideal life. Blessing can be in the face of difficulty, after heartache. Daniel had heartache. He had 16 different things to have heartache about, of the most profound sort. So don't imagine that your life has to be ideal. Is your background ideal? Has nothing bad ever happened to you in your life? Well, you're the exception. I know the person looking at me as I look back in the camera, they didn't have an ideal life. I haven't had an ideal life, but neither did Daniel. So get it out of your head that blessing has to be wealth and ease. Blessing is objective, undeniable. It's a witness to God's power and glory in the world, and it can come with a great deal of trouble and responsibility above all. So that's all I have for you today. I hope that was jam-packed full of value for you. If you've listened to it once, listen to it again. It's going to be worth doing. Pass it on to a friend who you think will benefit, especially if they work in administration for the civil government, and maybe they're beginning to itch about it, get a little bit, antsy. Hope that blesses you. God bless you. See you in the next one.